Hi, I'm Sarah Barth, Executive Director of Sempervirens Fund. Welcome to our next edition of Under the Redwoods, our webinar series in which we explore the science, history, inspiration, benefits of redwood forests. Sempervirens Fund acknowledges that the redwood forests that we work to protect here in the Santa Cruz Mountains were among the ancestral homes of a number of indigenous people who occupied these lands for millennia until they were forcibly removed. We are really grateful and pleased to work with some of their descendants today, in particular the Amamutsin tribe and the Muwekma Ohlone, to try to help restore both cultural and physical connections to this remarkable landscape. I know many of you are familiar with our webinar series, but I will remind you that, as we always do, this is being recorded and will be recast on our website. In addition, although we're using a different tool than we've used in the past, you can ask questions and we will try to answer as many of them as we can during the webinar itself or afterwards if need be. I also want to thank our sponsors. Our 2022 webinar series is sponsored by Scharf Investments, and today's webinar is supported by All Trails. So thank you to our generous supporters and sponsors. And this is the first of our series for the 2022 calendar year. So excited to be starting back up with this. Since we last spoke with you, a number of things have happened. In November and December of 2021, heavy rains finally came to our region, which was especially beneficial to the creeks and waterways of our area. And it was especially gratifying to see it happen in Mill Creek, where, as some of you know, if you've been following what we've been up to, Sempervirens removed a dam that was blocking Mill Creek, and a dam that had been in place for over a century. And with these rains, we see the natural creek bed restoring and looking natural once again, and bringing cold water and gravel downstream that will benefit coho salmon and steelhead. So we're really excited to see that project already having all kinds of benefit for that waterway. In January, of course, again, if you've been following what Sempervirens is up to, you may already know this, but we were delighted we had a mini fundraising push, and thanks to the generosity of folks like you on the screen, we were able to successfully complete the purchase of a 153-acre redwood property, the new gateway to Big Basin State Park, a property that has its own ecological values and importance, but also we think is going to play a really important role in the future of Big Basin, and in particular may play a catalytic role in helping the park to reopen to visitors sooner than otherwise after the CZU wildfires. So we're very excited about that. And I encourage you to pay attention to our next big adventure. We just announced it. We are doing a Hug a Tree challenge as part of Earth Day and striving to make the Guinness Book of World Records. So it's a fun way to show our love for the trees and educate people about the importance of trees. And we invite people in the region and really around the world to participate. So look for more information about that on our website, sempervirens.org. Speaking of hugging a tree, it couldn't be better timed with our speaker for today's webinar. Dr. Suzanne Bartlett Hackenmiller is an MD, medical doctor who specializes in integrative medicine, but she's also over time become an expert in forest bathing. And in fact, she has a book, The Outdoor Adventurer's Guide to Forest Bathing, that I recommend. And she's here to talk about what the forests can mean to our health, to human health. We talk a lot here at Sempervirens about the health of the forests and what humans are doing to forests, but this is about what forests can do for us. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and we are proud to have partnered with All Trails both to support this talk, but also because Dr. Hackenmiller is their medical director. So with that, welcome, Suzanne. Hi. Oh, Matt, I think we need to unmute Suzanne. Sorry, everybody. We're trying out a new technology, so bear with us.
I think Matt and I both unmuted me at the same time.
Perfect.
Anyway, I was about to say thank you. Thank you for the great introduction, Sarah, and I'm looking forward to our conversation at the end. So forest bathing, maybe people have heard about it, maybe they have not. It's a term that is literally translated from the Japanese term shinrin-yoku, and it's really about taking nature in through the senses. And we'll talk more about the health benefits of it when we're all done. But I had the absolute privilege and pleasure to come out to the San Vicente Redwoods in December to film this video. And I'm so pleased at the way it turned out. So without further ado, let's watch the video.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Suzanne Bartlett, Hackenmiller, and I appreciate you joining me today for some virtual forest bathing. Forest bathing is a term that was coined and translated directly from the Japanese term shinrin-yoku. And it's a term that was coined in the early 1980s by a couple of doctors in Japan who noticed that their patients were increasingly suffering from mental health issues, depression, anxiety, and even high rates of suicide. And they wondered if just getting their patients out of the lights and sounds and stress of the city out into nature could be beneficial for them, for both their mental and physical health. So these doctors started experimenting with their patients, and they found, in fact, that getting out into nature, just slowing down, taking nature in through the senses was beneficial to their patients. They did studies on their mental health. They did studies of their heart rate variability, their blood pressure, their pulse, their blood sugar. They even looked at stress hormones in their saliva and found that after spending time doing this practice, that their stress hormones went down. Quite a bit of research has now been published on the subject of forest bathing by these doctors and others around the world. So forest bathing, forest therapy, we tend to use the terms fairly interchangeably, is all about getting out in nature, slowing down, taking it in through the senses. We try to make the case that it's not a hike for physical fitness. It's not a nature identification walk. It really is just for the purpose of being in nature. In forest bathing, we use a standard sequence so that we do the same thing every time, with the goal of taking our participants deeper and deeper from our everyday monkey mind state into what we refer to as the liminal state. And this allows us to just kind of shed the stressors of the day. We use the term invitation, and so I will be inviting you today to try the things that I suggest, either at home as you're watching through your imagination, or perhaps try them outdoors in your own time. So after each invitation, we may pause, and I may ask you to reflect upon what you noticed during that invitation. And so I do hope you'll take a moment to pause, perhaps jot down a word or a phrase or a thought or something that you noticed during that invitation. You might choose to share it with others. You might choose to journal about it. All of these things help to solidify the experience in our memory. And we often say it's similar to having a dream, and you wake up from a dream, and if you share it with someone else or if you write it down, you're much more likely to remember it than if you just jump out of bed and go about your day. So there's something magical that happens. We believe that's where the healing effects occur, when we take time to share what we've noticed and really take this experience in. So the first invitation we do in the standard sequence is known as the pleasures of presence. So I invite you to join me where you are and start by simply closing your eyes. Just close your eyes and start by taking some slow, deep breaths. Taking these deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. As you take these slow, deep breaths, just notice that the air that you're breathing in is the same air that's shared by all the other beings of this more than human world. We're sharing this air with the plants, the trees, the animals, and the insects that also share this space. Continuing to take these slow, deep breaths, notice the way the air feels as it enters your nostrils. Notice first the temperature of the air. Is it cool or warm? Notice the moisture of the air. Does it feel different when it enters your nose as opposed to when it leaves your body? Do you notice any fragrances? What else do you notice about the air? And next, I invite you to notice the way the air feels as it comes into contact with your skin. Notice the air on the top of your head. Maybe it moves your hair. Notice the way the air feels on your arms and torso. Maybe it moves your clothing. Maybe it's still. Notice the way your feet feel as they come into contact with your shoes, or if you're barefoot, the way your feet come into contact with the ground. Imagine for a moment that you have roots that are growing out of your feet, through your shoes, and into the ground below your feet. Imagine that these roots are growing down, 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 down into the soil, twisting around the roots of the other people, the trees, perhaps the redwoods, all of the other trees and plants and flowers and shrubs. Imagine that the animals and the insects also have roots, and that all of these roots are growing down, down, down into the earth. And as they do, they weave in amongst each other. As we know, the roots of the trees and the plants communicate beneath the soil, creating a network, an intricate network below the earth. We know that all of these roots and their fungal networks are integral to their survival. And just imagine our roots also joining this basketry as it continues down all the way to the center of the earth. And when our roots get to the center of the earth, imagine that they pick up the energy and the warmth, and that this energy travels back up, 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 through all the roots, traveling around each other, intertwining and twisting until the roots bring the energy all the way back up into the soil beneath our feet. And that energy and warmth then transfers into our feet, traveling up through the body, first through the legs, our hips, our torso. Imagine that light and energy and warmth traveling all the way up to the top of your head. And as you continue standing here, begin to notice the sounds around you. First, start by noticing the sounds just inside your body. Perhaps you can hear your heartbeat. You might hear your breathing, maybe your stomach growling. Try to isolate just the sounds that are inside your body. And next, start to notice the sounds that are maybe within just about 5 to 20 feet of your body. See if you can isolate the sounds within 5 to 20 feet of you. Imagine that you're bringing those sounds into your body. And then finally, notice the sounds from as far away as you can hear. Expand your awareness to notice all of the sounds. And now imagine that you're bringing all of those sounds into your body. And finally, with your eyes still closed, if you're standing and if you're outdoors, start to slowly turn in a circle until you're called to stop in a particular direction. If you're watching this video, just notice if something in particular calls to you to notice it. Stop in that direction with eyes closed. And in a moment, I'll invite you to open your eyes on the count of 3. And when you do, open your eyes as if you've never been here before, as if you're seeing what you were drawn towards for the very first time. On the count of 3, you may open your eyes. 1, 2, 3. As you open your eyes, find something to gaze upon and take it in as if for the very first time. Our next invitation is known as What's in Motion. So you're invited to join us just simply noticing what is in motion. If you're joining us outdoors, you may walk, and I encourage you to walk very slowly as you take nature in. You can also do this sitting outside in nature. So as you're noticing what's in motion, just try to keep your attention focused on that. If you get distracted by a sound or something else that is distracting you, try to gently just return your attention to noticing what is in motion. You might notice water moving. You might notice the leaves as they move in the trees with the wind. You might see some insects or birds or animals. Just be open to noticing whatever you see that's in motion. Sometimes it helps to get close up and look underneath things. You might want to crouch down and see what's lower. You might look up. Just be open to noticing all around what's in motion. Our next invitation is all about exploring our sense of touch in nature. So I invite you to look around, see if something in the forest draws you toward it. It might be a tree, it might be some running water, it might even just be the ground. I invite you to make yourself comfortable, get close to your object, and see how you can tactily explore it. In this case, I have a tree, and I invite you, as you're watching, to imagine that you are standing next to a tree, or that you have your hands in the water, or maybe on the ground, somehow physically coming into contact with your natural element. And just start by noticing the way it feels. Perhaps first noticing the temperature. Is it hot or cold or cool or warm? Is it the temperature you expected it to be? Then maybe noticing the texture. Is it smooth? Is it crumbly? Is it rough? What kinds of textures does it have? Is it uniform throughout, or are there areas that feel different? What about the girth? How does that feel? Imagine that you were leaning into this tree. Does it feel sturdy? Does it feel like it's moving? Is there any vibration deep within the tree? Take a moment to feel what that feels like, or imagine what it might feel like if you were leaning into a tree of this size. Is there any motion? Is there any sound? And then you might just spend some time. Spend a good 5 minutes just being with your object in nature. Sometimes you might even decide to pose a question to the tree and imagine that for just this moment, that perhaps the tree has an answer for your question. Notice how you feel. Do you feel supported? Do you feel grounded? How does it make you feel? What else are you noticing? You can spend as much time as you like with your tree. And I like to thank the tree when I'm done for this experience. The next invitation is known as gazing up a tree. And we will invite you to start at the very bottom of a tree and slowly move your gaze from the roots of the tree upward, up the trunk, all the way to the crown of the tree. See if you can take as much time and really slow down for this process. So you might take some time to focus in on the smaller aspects of the tree and then bring your gaze back out to take in the entire tree, but slowly, slowly, slowly capturing the tree from the roots to the crown. In the spirit of Shinrin-yoku, we end each forest bathing session with a tea ceremony. And so today we have gathered some of the needles from the forest and placed them in our jar. And we'll go ahead and add our water and allow it to steep for a few moments here. You can just tell that the color is coming out. Our tea will be infused with the properties of evergreen, which include antimicrobial, antibacterial, antifungal properties. We even know that the phytoncides, which come from the essential oils of the trees, confer benefits both to the trees in helping them fight against bacteria and viruses. Those properties actually are transferred to us when we consume the tea. If you think about things like pine sol, we've known for a long time that we can get antimicrobial properties from evergreen teas. So we'll also be able to get vitamin C from this tea, and we'll just allow it to steep for about 5 or 10 minutes here before we go on. All right, so our tea is done steeping. We'll go ahead and take our lid off. So anytime that you're foraging in nature, a few rules apply. You always want to be sure that you have permission to forage. You always want to be sure that you know 110% what plant you're taking, that it's safe for human consumption. And we also practice the spirit of wild tending, which means that whenever we take something from nature, we also give something back. And so it might be that we even just sing a song. We might actually offer something back, which we'll do again in just a moment. So we'll go ahead and pour our tea. And for today, I just have 2 cups. I wish you could smell this. We always pour 1 more cup than the number of people we have in our group, because in the spirit of wild tending, we always give 1 cup back to the earth. So with that, I will offer this cup of tea back to this beautiful space. And next, I invite you to imagine that you're bringing this cup of tea up to your nose first, and just taking the fragrance of the forest in through your nose into the body. And as we've been doing through this whole invitation of forest bathing today, We'll end the experience with taking nature in physically into the body through our sense of taste. So everybody here, as if we had a group of people, we would go ahead and raise the glass to our mouth and bring nature into the body in this way. Sempervirens Fund acknowledges that redwood forests in the Santa Cruz Mountains are among the ancestral lands for many indigenous peoples who cared for these lands for millennia until they were forcibly removed. We are grateful to work with their descendants, including the Ama Mutsun tribal band and the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, to restore their cultural and traditional relationships to these magnificent lands. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. We'll conclude our tea ceremony today with one final simple invitation, and that is that if a word or a phrase arises in your mind having completed this virtual forest bathing walk, allow that word to formulate. And feel free to share it back to our group. And my word is gratitude for having the opportunity to spend this time with you today. Thank you for joining us for virtual forest bathing in the San Vicente Redwoods.
That was lovely. I love that property, and it's just wonderful to get to share it with so many people in that way. I want to start by, and I told you this when we were preparing for this talk, that I grew up in New England, pretty no nonsense, group of people, and who also love nature. And I know at some intuitive level that being in nature makes me feel better. I think most people know that. And certainly this COVID era has emphasized that. But I was curious to hear you reference in this some of the actual physical things that are happening in our bodies when we go into a forest. And I wondered if you could just elaborate on that a bit more. What is, for those of us who might be a little skeptical, what is it that's happening that causes us to feel differently?
Right. Well, I would just start by asking people how they feel after 30 minutes of virtual forest bathing. Even having been there in person, I'm feeling pretty chill just watching it all over again. And so those mental health benefits that we can't even necessarily put our finger on are happening. Studies have found that just spending time 20 minutes in nature reduces our salivary stress hormones. So they've tested the saliva of participants in studies and found that after 20 minutes in nature, We have lower stress hormones of salivary alpha amylase and salivary cortisol. So that's really something. You asked how this happens. So some of this is still to be determined, but it's exciting to me that studies are finding the reasons why. In one case, we know that there are bacteria that are found in soil. One is called Mycobacterium vaccae, and this bacteria, when we come into contact with soil, so even if we're just smelling, if you're walking in the woods and you can smell that familiar scent of soil, just the fact that you can smell it means you're inhaling the chemicals in the soil. So when we come into contact by inhaling or ingesting little particles of the soil, we're inhaling this bacteria. And one study found that when they exposed mice to this bacteria, that they were able to navigate a maze twice as fast as those that had not been exposed to the bacteria. So that's one thing we know. I mentioned the phytoncides in the piece, and it's believed that phytoncides are reside in the essential oils of plants, and particularly in evergreen plants. So when you're smelling that smell, that fragrance of evergreen, you're breathing in these phytoncides. Phytoncides have been studied in Japan by Dr. Lee, who's one of the people who coined the term Shinrin-yoku. And these phytoncides have been associated with increasing our natural killer cell activity and number in our body after spending time in nature. And one of their studies found that the natural killer cells remained elevated both in number and level of activity for a week after spending a 2-night, 3-day forest bathing excursion. They stayed elevated for 7 days, and they were surprised to find that those natural killer cells remained elevated for 30 days out after a weekend, essentially, in nature. So the natural killer cells are important for a number of reasons. They help us to fight viruses and bacteria, so especially pertinent right now in this era of COVID, but they also help to fight tumor cells. So we know that as we're alive, we're constantly creating tumor cells, constantly cells are dividing and replicating, and it's up to these natural killer cells to sweep through the body, find the abnormal tumor cells, and excrete them from our system. So extremely important in so many different ways. And I could go on and on about studies, and so.
But it's real.
Yeah, it's real. It's real. And it's so fun to me. This is where I geek out, because I really enjoy the fact that, of course, we inherently, intuitively know that we feel better when we're in nature, but it's so much fun, I think, when science confirms and figures out why.
Well, so one very specific question, this audience and Sempervirens Fund specifically is very focused on forests and redwoods in particular. And you speak of it as forest bathing, but do you see the same effect if we were, say, in a Red Rock Canyon in Utah? Is it nature writ large, or is it forest specific?
It is nature at large. And that has been some of the research to come out of the pandemic, is that people have tried to get out to natural spaces more, but also when people are unable to get to a beautiful landscape, that they're able to find nature perhaps even in their own backyard. And so it doesn't have to be a forest. It could be a beach, it could be a desert, it could be a prairie, or any number of nature scapes. But interestingly, studies are finding that you can have benefits from gazing at nature out a window, gazing at a photograph, gazing at a video of a nature experience, as we just did. You can forest bathe in the middle of the city with a street side tree.
Yeah, that I find so amazing, that it's that even in the virtual context, or even in a far diminished in terms of size, that a little plot of corner parklet can be as effective, or maybe it's not as effective, but can be effective in the same way that visiting a vast redwood forest could be. That's pretty remarkable. And in terms of the virtual component, it really suggests it could be made accessible very widely to people.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I shared with you when we met last week that I, during the pandemic, experimented with forest bathing with some very unusual, a house plant one time and a little area of an anthill and a dandelion in a sidewalk. And believe it or not, I was able to have a pretty remarkable experience with those tiny little microcosms of nature.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I know that I've read about and heard about a lot of people having similar experiences during the COVID lockdown where they were required to really stay close to home and find ways to interact with nature in a much smaller and really, really hyper local context.
Exactly.
I want to ask you, we talked about, both of us acknowledge the tribal people in our region and who are great partners to Sempervirens Fund, and we think a lot about and learn a lot about their perspective from nature from those partners. And so I was curious, as you were going through this forest bathing exercise, and particularly at the end, some of the gestures felt like they came from, could have come from indigenous practices, and certainly a viewpoint of the earth and humans being a bit more integrated than I think you might typically find in sort of European culture. I'm wondering, do you know if some of these forest bathing practices derive from indigenous cultures, or have you seen, similarities to indigenous practices?
Definitely. The founder of the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy is Amos Clifford, and he has infused a lot of the teachings that he passed along to us as forest therapy guides through his own experience, much of which was informed by Native American history and experiences. And certainly it's a very important, this holistic look at nature through this lens is so important in terms of viewing the more than human world, that we're just one very small speck, that this earth has been tended for centuries by people other than us, and that we all play a role in the future of this planet and our spaces and all of this kind of thing. So it's very much important and very intentional.
Yeah. Taking us in a different direction, one of the other things that you and I discussed was you shared with me a story about how in some areas of the world they're using prescriptions for nature. Right. And certainly as we think about the possibility that people could derive this benefit from even looking at a tree in the heart of an urban area, or looking at a poster, it suggests that this kind of access to nature might be made more equitable. But anyway, can you talk a bit about this idea of nature as a medical prescription and how groups like ours might think about that?
Right. Well, I personally prescribe nature to my patients. I've been doing it for a very long time in various different ways, whether it's a door handle prescription, as we call it, where somebody's, one of us is about to step out the door and we mention, hey, go take a walk outside, or something more prescribed like forest therapy. It's very real. I've been doing it a long time. I've worked with a number of doctors around the country and the world who are doing this in different ways. There are park prescriptions through organizations like Park RX America. There's the organization Walk with a Doc. I've been very involved with the organizers and founders of those organizations. And then just recently in Canada, through another one of my associates I've worked with, Dr. Melissa Lem, they have started actually allowing for healthcare insurance to cover prescriptions for national parks. And this is fantastic, obviously. And so it's something that obviously we would be very in favor of in this country, and perhaps it will come to that. So, yeah,
it's just part of our country's well-being, physical and mental. That seems amazing. I know here in California, we're having the state park system here in California is having active conversations about how to make access more equitable, and they're talking about a new program to put park passes at libraries where you can check out a park pass for free.
Oh, I love that.
But really, eventually, what we probably should be talking about is it being free for everybody so that it
Right.
can be accessed more
Yeah.
readily by all.
It would be great if it could be free. Obviously, we all need to chip in and, you know, provide for parks and natural spaces as much as we can. We talked about our trail prescription when we visited last week, and that's something that certainly could be free for people. But I'm working with a local park, working to create prescriptions for specific trails where we have both a physical prescription and a mental health prescription for each trail that a participant could connect to with a QR code on the trail to a website that would explain the health benefits of walking, running, hiking, jogging on a trail at different paces, or forest bathing, offering some forest therapy invitations at various stops along the way. I think there are so many different ways that we can prescribe nature and that we can do so equitably, and also taking into account people's, you know, level of mobility and things like that, making it inclusive.
I'm curious, so I'm going to ask one last question because I could probably ask you 50.
We could talk forever, as we discussed or discovered last week.
I want to open it up to our audience, but my last question is, you know, how important is it that we do this kind of forest bathing with a guide, the way you were there guiding us through, versus just going out for a walk? You know, how important is each component equally important, or
There are so many different ways that we can enjoy nature. We can go out for a nature identification walk. We can go out for a fitness hike, or, you know, with family and chatting and whatever. And there are benefits to every different way we could possibly use natural spaces. Forest bathing is just another one of those ways, and being able to slow down, really slow down and really take in the senses is something that not many of us just do on our own. So as forest therapy guides, we talk about it being similar to learning yoga. It's you could just teach yourself, or you could watch a video, or you could work with an instructor, and obviously you're going to get a different depth of experience with each different type of way of going about it. But having watched this video, or maybe listened to a recording or a book about forest bathing, you are to that extent equipped to go out and do it on your own. It's not rocket science. It's something, and honestly, when I talk to people who are hunters, or people who fish, or people who are bird watchers, all kinds of different people who use nature for various different purposes. Many times will say, oh, well, I've been forest bathing for 50 years.
Yeah, right.
So,
I'm thinking a little bit. I don't think my experiences in nature aren't quite as purposeful as that. And I'm not sure I stop and tell myself to breathe in and breathe out, but I do that. And it does remind me a lot of the things that I heard in your forest bathing felt like, you know, transcendental meditation, or very classic breathing techniques that exist in cultures around the world. And so it feels like maybe we're touching upon some very old ideas.
Absolutely. It borrows from all kinds of traditions. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I really was intrigued, and I know I calmed down. I always get a little nervous before these webinars, and as I listened to your voice and was watching the video, I relaxed.
That's so great.
Yeah, even via video, which, you know, you wouldn't think, but I do think it's effective. So, well, with that, let me turn it over to my colleague Matt and see if we've got some questions from the audience that he wants to share with us.
We do. Thank you. Thanks for a great conversation and for all your work. It's Dr. Hackenmiller. We have a couple questions. Wondering if there were some other types of invitations that occur in forest bathing exercises that didn't make it into this, and perhaps maybe you have a favorite or a couple favorites that you like to go to that didn't make it into this presentation.
Oh my goodness. There are hundreds of invitations. There are all kinds of invitations that are kind of our standbys, but the fun of it is that we can make them up as we go along. So in my book, that was what I did, is I used some standard ones, but I also made up all kinds of invitations, and it's almost like just reverting to child's play when you're outside. And so let me think. I mean, take any of the senses and just create an invitation about it. Sometimes we'll do animalistic kinds of things, and we'll you know, cup our hands over our ears so that we can hear better, and say that we're walking through the forest with deer ears or things like that. It's fun to you can get all kinds of woo-woo looking into, you know, how does this remind you of that? What kind of symbolism do you see as you're walking along? That happens to me all the time. I'll see a feather stuck in a thorn, and I'll think, how does that relate to what I'm going through in my life right now, or something like that. We play with thresholds, crossing over from one place to another, which can be metaphorical, can be all kinds of different things. So yeah, I could go on and on, but there are no rules. You can come up with any invitation that you like.
I bet children are especially receptive to this.
They're absolutely receptive, and they just do it naturally. If we just follow the lead of kids, that's what they're doing. They pick up everything, they touch everything. Sometimes I'll do that mindful activity where you look for 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, you know, so kind of going through like that. So, I mean, they're just infinite possibilities.
Yeah, that's great.
That is great, thank you. And one question was about writing exercises. Do you ever combine?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do I love to write, as you know, Matt. Journaling is one of the best things to do after forest bathing. Sit spot, I didn't talk about sit spot. Speaking of great invitations, sit spot is simply taking 20 minutes in nature, sitting with no agenda, and just seeing what happens. And we believe in the forest therapy world that something magical happens at that 20-minute mark, where the natural world gets used to you being there and just carries on about their business. And so in our forest therapy guide training, we were instructed and required to do sit spot twice a week and then journal about it afterwards. And it always felt like something I had to do at the end of the day. I never really felt like I had time to do it. I never thought I was going to see anything. And of course, I would always have these magical experiences, and I would journal about them. And so it's a beautiful practice to try to do sit spot on a regular basis and journal about it.
That's great. And I am, with our maybe last question here, wondering if in your book you have the Outdoor Adventurer's Guide to Forest Bathing, and you're really exploring sort of forest therapy at the same time that you're connecting it to other kinds of recreation. And I'm wondering how you're making that connection between those sort of more active experiences in exploring nature and these this more mindful sort of exercise and therapy.
Right. Well, as I explained in the book, the way that I came to forest therapy personally was after personal loss and dealing with grief. And initially, everything I was doing outdoors was adrenaline based, and then came to realize, of course, that we need balance, and learned of the practice of forest bathing, and then thought, how fun to marry the two. Kind of like people forest bathe as they fish or hunt or whatever, but what if as we're trail running through the woods or hiking or walking or biking, or as we're cross-country skiing or paddling in a kayak or a canoe or something, what if while we're doing those activities, we're also bringing in some of these elements of forest bathing? And so I find that I do it just naturally. I make up forest bathing invitations as I'm in a kayak looking down into the water. I find that I create these invitations, and it also helps me pass the time if I'm exercising outdoors to start noticing something visually in nature. And I found that when I interviewed a number of elite athletes around the country, that they also do similar things while they're outdoors practicing their sport. So for me, it's kind of fun just to combine the two. And I think that there is something, for me personally, I both need the activity, the physical exercise in nature, but I also need the quiet contemplative side. We need to find that balance.
I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to use facilitator prerogative. And we have a few more minutes.
Yeah.
I've heard you talk about nature pyramid, kind of akin to
That's
the pyramid that some people learned growing up. And I wondered if you could talk about that and how you do.
It's a neat concept because we have this idea of pyramids from the food pyramid, which, by the way, is always changing.
Right.
But the idea of this nature pyramid is that we know we need nature experiences in our lives, and we also have other things that we have to do in life other than sit spot, every day, which we love to do. But it was hard for me to do it twice a week as an assignment, and so we all have to acknowledge that we are busy people, most of us. And so the idea of the nature pyramid is that perhaps once a year, the top of the pyramid, the little triangle at the top, is a peak experience. Like perhaps once a year, you can make a trip to a national park or some grandiose nature experience. But then the rest of the year, you can break into other experiences as the pyramid goes. So maybe if once a year you're going to a grandiose, beautiful place, landscape, then maybe a few times per year you can make it to a state park or someplace a little more local, but also takes some effort to get there, and is purposeful to make your trip there. But then on a more regular basis, at least once a week, maybe making it to a community or city park or area. And then on a daily basis, trying to at least notice some element of nature, taking yourself outdoors on those tiny little breaks, even during work, lunchtime, a quick break, walk a little bit farther from your car into the building so that you can notice the trees along the parking lot even. There was one study that looked at college students sitting on a park bench as opposed to sitting in a lab with no windows, and they found that after 5 minutes, the students sitting on a park bench in nature had improvement in all aspects of mental health as compared with the ones that sat in a lab for 5 minutes. They repeated the experiment and increased the duration of time to 15 minutes and found that it didn't add any benefit statistically over the 5 minutes. So 5 minutes in nature even has mental health benefits. So you can have that in the base of your nature pyramid on a daily basis.
Yeah, we can all get to that daily. I love that. As a busy person whose life is pretty scripted, that right. I should be able to do.
Exactly, we all can.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This has been a lot of fun and really interesting and provocative, and not something I ever would do on my own. Although I think I do portions of it naturally. Right. So it's been great. I want to thank you, and I want to urge people to get your book, The Outdoor Adventurer's Guide to Forest Bathing. And we will be posting this webinar on our website if you want to watch the video again or invite your friends to watch it. And to our guests and viewers, I hope you'll join us next month. We have a really different topic. Most of you probably know, but just a reminder that oceans and forests are inextricably linked. That's especially true in our region. They call them coast redwoods for a reason. And so we're going to have an expert come and talk about what we're learning from the ocean floor about the future of climate change and what it means for the terrestrial side of things. So please join us. And Dr. Hackenmiller, thank you again for being with us today and for the work you're doing. And I hope Sempervirens can be an advocate for nature as a prescription. I really love that. And not that I hadn't thought about nature as being good for your health, but the idea that it should be part of our medical system and our insurance system is, I think, just fantastic and something we should be championing. So thank you for bringing that to us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yes. All right. Thank you all.